Howdy, it's Rosa. And I'm not using my big boy mic once again for a couple of reasons, mainly because I'm kind of sick right now and I'm exhausted. I always tend to get sick near Christmas time, but I really wanted to get this video out, mainly because my last video that was commentary did exceptionally well on my channel. Like, wow guys, even my pilot didn't get this number. At least in this time frame. And I also have been wanting to talk about this topic for a while. It's been something on my mind ever since I started getting back into the fandom again, and it's something I had spoken about with multiple friends and multiple people. I will say this video will be a bit different from my last one. It's not going to be straight hardcore facts, it's going to be more of an observation and a retrospective, which is supposedly supposed to be the title. The cross video was entirely logical and informational. I just want to make that clear that this stuff that I'm going to be talking about is not necessarily canon, but it is a topic that I think should be discussed and I think should be brought to light, considering a lot of the allegories that Ink's story bring to neurological issues and neurodivergency in general. And I want to bring awareness to how prevalent it is in his whole entire design and who he is as a person. So, Ink sans. Ink is widely known throughout the fandom, no matter where you are. I mean, before I even got into the Undertale multiverse side of the fandom, I was knowledgeable about who Ink was. Even when I was just into the regular Undertale game, like, the only thing I really consumed was AUs that focused on the main cast. And yet I still knew who Ink was alongside Error, but especially Ink. Though I didn't really know what his whole deal was, I still recognized his design whenever I saw it in comics or comic dub compilations. I knew kind of what his personality was. I recognized that he was definitely an artist or some sort of allegory for the artist of the fandom. There was some deep stuff I didn't know. I didn't know his backstory. I didn't know, the extent of his personality. I didn't even know he was soulless, but I still could recognize Ink and know who he was, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people in the fandom, no matter the side, have similar ideas. I remember seeing mainly the original fan game Undertale artists still drawing Ink or reposting art with him or recognizing that he exists, similarly as to what I experienced. He was famous. Ink is known. I want to say that the Crayon Queens, Error, and Gino are the most popular stances out there, but they really aren't. I genuinely think that Ink is the most popular sans of all. I would recognize Error, sure, but Ink was a lot more prevalent in most media because he was always there, either in the background or as a side character, as an antagonist, as a protagonist, whatever you think. However, even still, Ink has a lot of mischaracterization about him in the fandom. Kamyet's page about him is purposely kind of ambiguous. What we do know is that he is kind of a jerk. That is no ifs or buts about it, and he's very blunt and sees people more as playthings rather than actual people. That is concrete. However, his likes and distastes are very limitedly said. What he actually is into with people-wise is also not said. The only canon relationships he has are with his dads, and that's pretty much it. He never canonically meets Error, he never canonically meets Dream, or makes the Star Sanses. Nobody is canon in Ink's actual story, because Ink is not supposed to be canon. Ink is a character that was made to be fluid and made to fit any narrative that a person wants. He has no original concept, so he's basically like the self-insert for any artist out there in the fandom. They can put whatever they want onto Ink and he will oblige, because his limited characteristics and who he is as a person helps people to make a blank canvas of a character that still holds true to the original attributes that were given and written down in his character sheet. However, in canon and how we know Ink in general and how people tend to understand him still gives him attributes enough to analyze and study. I'm going to be mixing my analysis with the both canon actual version of Ink and also Fanon and what people tend to say about Ink, because both tend to go hand in hand with this specific analysis. So, Ink and his vials. Ink is soulless. This is a very well-known fact if you know Ink as a character. Depending on your reaction and how you view being soulless depends on how you depict Ink. Some people depict Ink as sympathetic, who can't be blamed for not having a soul. They also make it so that his vials do actually give him real emotions. They're not quote-unquote fake, even if they're faulty. They are still real and true to him. He's still feeling these emotions in real time. He just can choose and pick what can course through him at that point. However, others tend to view him as manipulative or cruel because he has no soul. I don't really blame people for this kind of characterization of him. I see people getting mad at it from the other side, but we have to understand in the actual Undertale, our only reference of a character who is soulless is someone cruel and mean and gaslighting. Flowey is our only reference of a character with no soul, and he is the epitome of just cruelty. It was purposely written this way. I think definitely it was to show how souls are even more, centered around a monster, not only with their magic, but who they are as people. Without it, you tend to forget all your morals and who you are, and you become more like a human being. Monster with no soul is a human. So when you look at Ink, who has no soul, and yet has such an important purpose, it does seem inclined that he would act like the other soulless being that we have seen. However, I think there's some other perspective that we should see here. I think being soulless is a representation of either neurodivergency or mental illness in general. I know, big step here, but let me explain. There's no solid mental disability that I can place on the soulless being concept. It can fit so many different variables and represent so many different things, from depression to autism to many other things out there. I want to focus first on the depression aspect, because though it has less evidence for it, I do think it's easier to explain with the limited evidence. In the two canons that Ink has, Ink without his vials in Canon turns into a corpse. He cannot move, he cannot speak, he cannot even blink. He's not dead, Ink can't die, but without his paints, he does not feel anything. It's like he doesn't have a soul. He's a dead body without a soul. However, Ink already died when he ripped his soul apart. The only thing keeping him going is the creators. Without anything to actually serve as his blood, he basically falls. He's like a robot with no oil. He has nothing to actually keep him stable. In the Fandom interpretation, he still can move, he can still speak, but he has no emotions or moral compass. He doesn't feel anything for anyone. All he does is fight or go on autopilot from the pre-existing thoughts he had when he did have emotions. Again, like a robot. Either interpretation are great examples of the different types of depression. The vials can represent medication or dopamine in general, which is very rare to those who actually have depression. The first interpretation can be seen as without your medication or any dopamine hits. Let's say if you haven't seen your friends in a while or family and you've been isolated, you don't want to get out of bed. Chronic depression tends to make you feel like a corpse. People tend to rot in days, so badly that your skin can literally rot off, which is why it's important for hospital patients to constantly be moving if they're in a coma. If they're not, their skin literally starts to rot. However, as a skeleton, that doesn't really come into play. Ink being stagnant and unable to move is a great representation of chronic depression, not wanting to do anything, not wanting to react, not feeling anything besides emptiness. Numbness is very common with chronic depression, especially those who get bedridden. You don't feel anything or anything for anyone. You just feel empty. There's numbness. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video, and I myself have experienced this as well, have felt that numbness. It's debilitating. It is strenuous. It's so loud and hard to crawl out of that you just feel stuck in it. When Ink does have his vials, he picks and chooses his emotions to feel for that day. He can suppress different emotions if he truly wants to, and that in itself also comes with depression. The ability to suppress your emotions so deeply only comes with a sense of emptiness lingering inside you constantly. Ink not having a soul and having a big cavity in his chest makes it so that he's constantly empty in a way. Though he has his emotions, though he feels things, he doesn't fully feel things. He's constantly limited by his own body, which comes with chronic depression, with you being limited by your own mind and mental well-being. When Ink doesn't want to feel something, he can suppress it and choose to feel different things instead. He'll always choose to feel happiness, even if it feels fake, even if it's not what his body actually wants to feel, even if he knows it isn't right to suppress those other emotions, he can still do it until he gets a burnout. The Fandom interpretation serves as a good example of functioning chronic depression. This is where normal people can still live their lives, can still hold conversations with people, can still have a social standing, while still being very depressed and possibly passively wanting to commit not alive. I have to censor myself so I can get paid. Sorry, YouTube. Ink can still do things. Ink can still speak. He can still talk with other people and do what he needs to do. However, he's moving on autopilot. He's not completely there. He's not there at all. He doesn't feel anything. He has that constant emptiness feeling inside of him, and all he can do is just rely on the shackles of his body. Either interpretation is a great example of depression. The bluntness towards them just shows that he doesn't have any care to care about other people. He has no empathy for anyone, including himself. Why would he actually care for others when he just doesn't feel anything himself? He's just empty. How are you supposed to feel and care for others if you don't feel anything at all? Most people with depression tend to push away their friends and family until they're completely isolated. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. People will tell themselves that no one cares for them, no one loves them, no one sees them. However, they don't realize that deep down, they are refusing to speak to people, isolating themselves in their room or at school, skipping out on hanging out with friends or family until they fully isolate themselves and their brain can say, I was right. No one does care about you. No one cares about you. Most people don't even realize they're doing this, following this self-fulfilled prophecy. When you're so deep in your pain, you can't realize what's going on around you. You can't realize that your brain is tricking you itself, luring you and trying to hurt you. You can't see that because your brain is in control. Ink being rude to others, not being able to let anyone in or truly caring about them, pushing them away and using them for his own benefit and not really feeling any repercussions from that, and only caring about two real people in his life, seeing them as family and genuinely being upset if they go, shows depression. Those two people happen to be his fathers. Of course, out of anyone in the multiverse, not even his friends, he would care about his family. Most people tend to put family first. Even if you don't feel a lot of love towards that family, even if it's rocky, people will still always gravitate towards their family. It's animal instinct, truly. So Ink having no attachments or wanting any attachments does make sense for himself. He's so focused on his job, seeing it as his only purpose in life, that he doesn't care about anyone else, which his actual job is another example of this depression. Ink doesn't care about himself. He cares about the creators, what they want. They're everything to him. They gave him everything. They gave him another chance. But he doesn't really deserve it if he doesn't do his job, right? At least that's what he tells himself. That's what the creators possibly tell him, depending on the interpretation of the story. Ink isn't anybody without his creators. If he doesn't have them, then he has no purpose, and he has no reason to keep going. His vials are just something he uses on occasion, even if he still had his vials. If he failed his creators, then what's the point of using them at all? While depression is very clear-cut and dry, you may be wondering how I can tie possibly autism into this, or any other mental disorders. I'm not going to go into every possible mental disorder that Ink could have, but I've talked about it on my Tumblr, so I'm going to speak about it now. Ink is very coded to be autistic, or at least has ADHD. I'm pretty sure the ADHD one is confirmed, don't quote me on that, I probably won't know until I finish recording this video, but the autism one? I think Kamyet forgot how similar ADHD and autism traits tend to be, because, damn, they really didn't realize how much they made, Ink autistic. So, what is my evidence for Ink being autistic? Because nobody really talks about that. They talk about him having ADHD. How the heck is Ink autistic? Well, as I mentioned before, being soulless is constantly looked down upon in the fandom and in the multiverse in general. The only examples that we have are cruel beings that are not the nicest, and even Ink himself is not the kindest to other people. However, what we also see is a slight problem. Let's look at Papyrus. Papyrus wants to be a royal guard. He's loud, he's abrasive, he doesn't know social cues, he tends to be outcasted by his fellow monsters, he's taken care of by Sans even though he's a grown adult and can do other things on his own. There's evidence of him stimming, there's evidence of him having hyperfixations, such as getting into the royal guard and spaghetti. There's also evidence of him having safe clothing and possible safe food, but even so, he doesn't eat a lot because he gets grossed out easily. He also has sensory issues because he finds a lot of things greasy and gross, so he keeps things extra tidy. All in all, Papyrus is one of the most autistic-coded characters I have ever seen in media. But why bring him up? Well, it's because Ink tends to act very similar to Papyrus. Ink is also abrasive and is also very loud. He also doesn't understand social cues. He has a hard time with emotions, literally with the vials, and also has a hard time with black and white thinking, only agreeing that the creators are in the right and everything that they say and do is correct. Papyrus, meanwhile, thinks that everyone has the capability of being a good person no matter what. This black and white thinking gets them in trouble, either makes them lose friends, or gets them hurt. With autism too, there's a sense of low empathy and high empathy. Papyrus falls on the high empathy side of autism. It's two different perspectives of autism. Both of them might have traits, but they also present differently because of their empathy levels. Ink has evidence of also getting overstimulated by throwing up when he gets too excited. He has a lot of derealization episodes, which tend to happen with people who have autism, and he's also aromantic, which is very common with people who have autism because they don't understand close relations like that. Or because they're really grossed out by it, which makes sense because the close intimacy requires some form of touching other people, when a lot of people who have autism have sensory issues and also tend to find things a lot of time gross. These two are very similar in their traits, and if you say Papyrus is autistic coded, and then you look at Ink, who has almost all the same traits besides the immense kindness that Papyrus has, then, you're making the argument for me. However, if that doesn't convince you, then there's one thing they share that you cannot dispute. The isolation from their fellow monsters, in their world in general. Besides Undying, a lot of people tend to actually not understand who Papyrus is as a person, or welcome him in with open arms. Papyrus is desperate for friends, which proves that a lot of people in Snowden don't typically want to be his friend, or tend to get uncomfortable around him because of his abrasive nature. People don't understand him, or care to. Though the Underground is known for being kind and sweet, they look at Papyrus and still see someone different, and that's why the fandom babied him for so long. A lot of the old fandom didn't understand autism, they didn't understand autistic coding, and Papyrus is that out the gate. Despite the Underground being so welcoming, being a place where people just look at you and care for you, Papyrus, who is autistic coded, is still shunned by society, even though this is different from the human society. They look at him, see something different, and still don't understand him. And that scares most people, which either makes them want to protect him and shield him from the world, or they don't want to be near him at all. Papyrus's black and white thinking of goodness and kindness also does not help his case, where people see him as weak and also don't want to be near him because of that. Why am I bringing this all up? Because in the original Undertale game, there is prejudice against people who are autistic. Now, I don't think this is mean-spirited compared to the actual humans that we know in our real-life world. There's not actual hate towards people who are autistic, just no understanding of it. I do think it's probably something that is widely known down there, but it's still met with apprehension that society tends to put on actual autistic people. Papyrus can take care of himself, and he's very capable of taking care of you, the player, and wants to be able to be there for you. However, people either don't want to be there for him because him not following social cues makes them uncomfortable, or if they do, they want to shield him from the world so they don't further get uncomfortable, or that he doesn't realize they are. Now, if we look in the actual multiverse, the way that the multiverse treats Ink and how they see him is very along the lines of the similar experiences that autistic people tend to face. Ink is not widely liked in the multiverse. In fact, he is quite hated. He is seen as cruel and mean and blunt, and a lot of his old friends tend to cut him off because they don't actually like his morals and values. And if we look at Ink's rudeness and his inability of seeing people as people, it does align with the side of autism that lacks a lot of empathy. Ink doesn't feel a lot for other people. Instead, he's more focused on himself and his job. That doesn't make him uncaring. He's capable of having friends. He was friends with Dream for a very long time in his canon before they eventually separated. And though that friendship was a bit rocky, they still were friends. He still cared for him. Dream understood that Ink wasn't the nicest person, and also understood his brashness and harshness. However, the only thing that ticked him off was his actual job. People look down at him for actually not having a soul, and that causes Ink to have to be lonely on his own regard. Though Ink is so focused on his job that he doesn't really care that he doesn't have connections, it's still something that naturally will bother him as an actual person, which is why he latches on to Top and Aster. Ink's bluntness also leans into the fact that he is autistic. People who have autism tend to actually not mice their words. You're not going to get someone who lies if they have autism, unless they're purposely trying to lie. Ink's inability to pick up social cues to see that he actually messed up and hurt someone's feelings also plays a role in his bluntness and his natural jerkness. Him unable to actually see people as people also leans into that. People with autism have a hard time of actually separating themselves from themselves and putting themselves in another person's shoes. They can't see other people's perspective because that's insanely difficult for them. They also tend to struggle with actually seeing their life as another life or in someone else's life. They can't put themselves into another person, but they can put themselves into fictional characters, which is why a lot of autistic people tend to be into the arts. Which, ring-a-ding-ding, what is Ink into? Damn, that's kinda crazy, huh? Ink also has insane hyperfixations and jumps from one thing to another. He gets invested in different AUs that pop up and eventually gets bored and moves on to the next. He has a horrible memory, which also tends to happen with autistic people who have horrible brain fog and constantly has to write things down. He has a wide range of hobbies, likely due to him jumping from hyperfixation to hyperfixation and getting bored with each one, and eventually having to find a new one to be entertained. And Ink is so hyperfixated on his job that he forgets to actually form meaningful connections and find a purpose for his actual life as a person, not just an object for the creators. Due to all of this, the reason why I like the Star Sands as a concept is because it gives Ink the chance to get the support that he needs. Dream and Blue being there for Ink and being able to help him and give him food, even though Ink doesn't need to eat, it's still pretty nice and once in a while. Actually help him sleep, even if he doesn't need it, it's still good for his body. And overall, let him rest and build meaningful conversations is the support that is actually needed for him. To help him remember things that he doesn't actually remember, to keep him on schedule, to get him up in the morning, also helping him from getting distracted by things so he can actually focus on tasks at hand is also something he desperately needs. He can thrive a lot better when he has people around him to help him remember things, and overall just be there as a nice presence. It gives Ink power to further execute his job and to be on the top of his game, and be emotionally supported as well. Now there is one more conversation I want to have before we leave off here, and I think it's something important that the whole fandom needs to understand and recognize. Making Ink a villain is not a bad thing, but making Ink a villain for being soulless is directly ignoring the connotations of what being soulless can actually be. Being soulless can be a representation of mental illness and also neurodivergency. Flowey's whole arc can be the direct representation of a horrible mental health crisis that was unchecked for so long. which is why he felt ostracized and misunderstood. This fandom for many years has villainized Ink or purposely made him cruel just because he doesn't have a soul. And though I don't blame those people, because of the evidence we were given of soulless creatures, I do want to try to expand your horizon into making him a bit more complex. Ink isn't just a soulless husk. He's still a person, and he's still capable of feeling and caring for others. His dads exist because he loves them. He loves them dearly, and it's very important to his character that he loves these people. Ink, without a soul, is still capable of love. He is an example of a soulless being in the multiverse that is still able to form positive connections while having a purpose in life. Flowey is just one example of what can go wrong if you don't have any of these things. You don't have to see Ink as mentally ill, or with any neurodivergent traits at all. However, I do think it's important that we acknowledge that these things could actually explain who he is. Down to the very core of his being, everything about him is either ADHD coded or autistic coded, or even mental health coded. And I think it's something that the fandom should explore instead of just repeating again and again that he's a villain, that he's mean and cruel, and that he manipulates his friend and is evil. I don't think that fully is comprehending who Ink is as a character. Ink is capable of love. Ink is capable of care. Yes, he still can be unempathetic and uncaring to those that he doesn't actually see in his radar, and he doesn't see people as actual people and just things, and he sees himself as above them. Yes, those are bad traits of him, but every character has bad traits of them. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. Good or bad people don't tend to really exist. It's complexities that make people who they are, and Ink is complex because he's a person too. Making him evil because he has no soul reads like he was never a person to begin with in that story. Give Ink the chance to shine in your story as a decent character, a complex character. If he still doesn't fit into the cracks, then that's fine. Cut him out. But I want to see you try. I want to see everyone try, because Ink deserves that. And people who relate to Ink and who he is as a person deserve that too, especially since they probably already feel different enough.